Fatal Frame 2 is one of the best examples of how to do a sequel. Released in 2003, it improves upon almost everything in the first game that came out 2 years prior and delivers another brilliantly crafted horror experience while also managing to tell a gripping and tragic story. The awkward voice acting of the first game has been replaced with solid performances that actually manage to convey and evoke emotions this time. The spirit designs and animations have been improved to stomach-churning levels of detail, and when coupled with the amazing environments full of life and history, it makes the game fantastically immersive. The controls have been slightly improved since the first game. You may still struggle to not do a quick 360 after the camera angle changes, but at least the environment's hitboxes are more refined so you don't get stuck on as many objects. Combat is slightly altered this time around, as the camera you're using is different to the one in the first game. Fatal Frame 2's camera requires you to get up and stay closer to targets to get the best chance to do the most damage. If you don't wait for those vital zero-shot moments, you will do almost no damage to enemies, so you really need to be patient and wait for zero-shot opportunities. This, however, can slow gameplay down a lot, as there are many enemies in the game that are not aggressive enough and will spend most of their time circling you or backing away when you try to get close. It's definitely a step down from the first game in my opinion, and it'll become clearer as to why throughout the rest of the video. The minigame puzzles are much more interesting this time and are actually quite fun and challenging to complete. There's a lot less reliance on spirit barrier locks and more of a focus on implementing progression naturally into the world and narrative. The jump scares are incredibly effective. I'm sure I've been genuinely startled more often playing this game than I have playing any other, and that's not to say that there's an overabundance of jump scares. It's just that they're very well utilized and varied enough that you can't really predict them. Where the first game contained jump scares that were always accompanied by a startling sound effect, this game occasionally leaves out the audio cue entirely, and it often leads to a bigger scare than if it had used one. Since you associate jump scares with a startling sound effect, in times when you don't hear that sound effect and suddenly notice a spirit standing right in front of you, it can be absolutely terrifying. The more subtle examples of horror are also amazing. Things like hearing the whispering voices of the dead as you traverse a dark hallway, or a doll's head silently falling off its shoulders really builds a sense of unease and has you second guessing yourself more and more as you get further immersed. It's incredible, and this experience alone makes the game worth playing. There's not much more I can talk about without delving deeper into spoiler territory, and I'll refrain from talking about things that are too similar to the first game so as to not unnecessarily bloat this video. So if you're new to the Fatal Frame series, I recommend watching my video on the first game to learn about that stuff, link in the description. So let's talk about the story. I'll be going through it in a lot of detail, so massive spoilers from here on. Also, for the sake of clarity, when I describe events using the name Mio, I'm referring to the character's actions during cutscenes, and when I use the word you, I'm referring to the player's actions while controlling Mio. I'm not sure if it's entirely necessary to explain that, I just thought I'd include it just in case. Anyway, the game begins with the line,
"Didn't we always promise each other that we would always be together?"
This is the first hint at the recurring theme of companionship in the game, and the eeriness of its delivery clues you into its not-so-happy applications. The opening cutscene introduces you to Mio and Mayu, teenage twin sisters who are enjoying the beautiful scenery of a forest that they used to play in as children. As they take in the clear, open air, Mio experiences several traumatic flashbacks that depict a younger Mayu falling down a cliff in the forest and mangling her leg. It's clear that Mio still feels guilty about the accident, and there seems to be a kind of friction between the two sisters regarding this event, even though they are clearly very close. As Mio snaps out of one of her flashbacks, she sees Mayu chasing a red butterfly into the forest. Mio follows after her, but gets spirited away to a much darker version of the forest and starts to have visions of Mayu in a white kimono. This is where you gain control of Mio for the first time and make your way towards a light source further into the forest in search of Mayu. On the way, you'll notice just how much more oppressive and suffocating this version of the forest is compared to the bright, calming one from earlier. This, accompanied by the somber yet ominous chant heard through the trees, helps to convey that you're definitely not in Kanto anymore. As Mio catches up to Mayu, a kaleidoscope of glowing butterflies erupts from behind her. And yes, that's what a group of butterflies is called. I haven't just gone overboard with the thesaurus. The camera pans up to reveal an old village below them, and Mayu says, "The Lost Village," in a strangely dark tone, unbefitting of the Mayu you were introduced to earlier. Mayu recounts that she's heard of this village before. Apparently it disappeared during a festival long ago, and people who get lost in the village find themselves stuck here. I'm not sure how she could possibly know this though, unless someone or something told her. You make your way down the mountain to the village with Mayu and stop in front of the first house. Here is where one of my favourite moments in the game takes place. The outer frame Mayu puts a comforting hand on Mio's shoulder as they look at the foreboding building. Miu then reciprocates the gesture and the two share a loving moment. Then Mayu walks into the frame and past Mio with the now disembodied hand still on Mio's shoulder. A chilling voice whispers to Mio, and she looks around to see nobody behind her. An absolutely spine-twisting moment. They enter the building and are immediately presented with the apparition of a woman through a latticed screen. This building is dense with a dangerous presence that seems to affect Mayu a lot more than Mio. Maybe this sensitivity to the paranormal is why Mayu seems more off than Mio does. The twins share visions of horrific events that took place in this house. These visions are splattered with memories of death and rage, as well as fragments of the catatonic laughter of a girl in a bloody kimono. Exploring this house reveals the beginning of the story of a couple who also got spirited away in this village. Following their story is an optional side quest that takes place throughout the game, alongside the main story, so I won't spoil it here. Since Mayu seems to have more of a connection with the spirit world, when she comments on feeling cold or being watched to Mio, whom you, the non-psychic regular Joe, are controlling, it really feels like there's something there that you can't see. And since she makes these comments pretty often, you end up feeling really ill-equipped for the situation, like you're somewhat blind to the danger around you. To diminish this feeling though, the twins find the camera obscura, which is a different camera to the one in the first game. It takes longer to acquire the camera in this game, which makes the opening segment much more tense because you spend longer feeling completely defenseless. A terrifying encounter with the female apparition seen earlier scares the twins into fleeing the house, but the front door is now locked. More exploring of the house and puzzle solving is needed to escape. You'll also encounter Miyako, the female apparition again, but this time as a boss fight. It's a good, easy first fight that teaches you the game's battle mechanics, which are pretty much the same as the first game, except spirits will now sometimes target Mayu instead of Mio, so you'll need to make sure that you keep her safe and try not to use her as bait too much. After this fight, Mio blacks out and has another paranormal vision of Miyako's demise. She wakes up to find Mayu gone. Again, you'll soon realize that a lot of this game is spent trying to find Mayu, who has wandered off somewhere else. You're often given a clue as to where she's gone through short segments where you gain control of Mayu as she mindlessly chases after those mysterious red butterflies. Putting the player in Mayu's shoes seen through Mio's visions is a good way of showing you where she is in a natural, somewhat believable way. You now have to go find Mayu again, but before leaving the house you have to do battle with some more spirits. One of these fights is against several generic villager spirits and is one of the worst aspects of this game in my opinion. During these villager fights you're up against 2 to 3 enemies, which I would usually consider a good thing since multiple enemy fights present a fun challenge, but they move and attack so slowly that it takes so long to get a zero shot on them. They even back away from you, which is extremely annoying when you're trying to get close to them for a zero shot. These fights really kill the pacing and I think could have been improved by making the villagers more aggressive. The other fight you'll have before leaving the house is against a female spirit that emerges from a box, similar to Sadako from the Ring franchise. It's a much better fight as it teaches you that you'll need quick reactions to get zero shots during the brief windows of time that she gives you before attacks. Leaving the house, you follow the path you saw Mayu take to the large gate on the other side of the village. It's locked by a barrier spirit, so off you go to unlock it. During this little adventure, you happen across a white-haired boy behind a barred window. He calls out to Mio, mistaking her for someone called Yae. Yae. Why does that name sound familiar? He continues to refer to Mio by the wrong name and warns her that the ritual is about to start. At this point in time, you don't have much information on the ritual, but from what you can gather, it's not a fun one, and you should probably try to escape before befalling the fate of the Twin Shrine Maidens like the white-haired boy advises. After gathering a couple of keys throughout the village, you make your way back to the locked door and open it. Passing through it reveals a huge mansion on the other side of the bridge. While crossing it, you encounter a drowned female spirit, who will attack you, of course. This fight is great in concept, but in reality it's incredibly slow-paced and boredom-inducing. The woman will float around you in a state of imperviousness for what seems like half a minute sometimes, and will dive down before grabbing you from underneath. It's another spirit that feels like it needed some more aggression to make the fight actually enjoyable. Once she's defeated, you make your way to the mansion. Upon entering, you get yet another phenomenally spooky cutscene. Mio enters and sees what looks like Mayu hidden in the shadows down the hall. She moves towards Mayu, but the door shuts behind her and her torch begins to malfunction. While she hits the torch trying to fix it, you get glimpses of spirits standing silently in the darkness, briefly illuminated by the torch's light. Mio doesn't see this, but you, as the player, does, and it once again shows how blind you are to the dangers around you when you're alone. The torch doesn't come back on after the cutscene, and you're left to explore this death-drenched building without it. Since you can't rely on your sight as much now, your sense of hearing comes more into play, and as you begin to rely on that, the game's subtle spooky noises become all the more potent. Down the hall you find 2 doors, only the left of which is open to you at this time. Not long after entering it, you're treated to another Mayu segment where you, as her, follow more crimson butterflies through hallways, groups of fleeing spirits, and finally to the center of a room where the girl in the bloody kimono stands, surrounded by butterflies. Looks like you're gonna have to rescue Mayu from this murderous lunatic. Making your way through the halls that you saw Mayu traverse, you fight a couple of horrifically slashed up spirits whose limbs look as if they're dangling from their tendons. Even looking at them is enough to bring up one's last meal. These 2 spirits are amazingly animated and back up their horrifying appearances with equally terrifying cries and moans of pain. Upon entering the room you last saw Mayu in, you hear that same evil laughter and notice a severe lack of Mayu. When you go to leave through the opposite door, Mio has a vision of the bloody kimono girl standing amongst dozens of lifeless corpses. Her laughter grows more ear-achingly demonic, and a spirit appears next to her, stumbling towards you with ropes wrapped tightly around its body. This is the Kusabi, which you heard mentions of by passive spirits on your way through this mansion. As the cutscene ends, he'll chase you around the room and will one-hit kill you if he catches you. Thankfully, he's incredibly slow and easy to dodge even in this enclosed space, and he's also stuck in this room, unable to chase you outside it for whatever reason. This part is similar, I guess, to the segments in the first game where you need to escape Kyrie. It's kind of pointless in my opinion and doesn't provide much in terms of gameplay, but it is pretty spooky though. Further on, there's a door blocked by a spirit barrier, and snapping a photo of it reveals a blood-stained door in the hallway where you fought the slashed up spirits. Going back there, you enter a tiny room and have to fight the 2 slashed spirits again. I admire this fight for how it crams you into this claustrophobic space with 2 deadly spirits with different attack patterns. It's a challenge to keep track of their locations, especially when they teleport, but when it comes down to it, you'll just have to brute force your way through it, snapping shots whenever you can instead of waiting for 0 shots, because you'll rarely have a chance to get one without the other spirit hitting you from behind and breaking your focus. It's another good fight in concept, but the game's combat mechanics really ruin it for me. After scraping your way through this fight, you make your way upstairs where Mio will get a vision of 2 men arriving at the pre-disaster village who are here to research its folklore. The younger of the 2 men catches the eye of one of the twin girls that came here to greet them. After this, you enter an eerily lit room with a faint light flashing at the darkness. Moving further in reveals the motionless body of a woman on the ground. The camera's filter doesn't react to her, so you're left confused as to what she is. Entering the door past her allows you to once again be reunited with Mayu, whose condition seems to be worsening. Exiting back through the previous room means walking past that motionless body, who, when approached this time, attacks. It's the same spirit as the one that crawled out of the box earlier, so if you enjoyed that fight, you'll also enjoy this one, especially with an added Mayu. This whole scene, for lack of a better word, is extremely well crafted in my opinion. The suspense you feel as you carefully walk past the body the first time is incredible, since you haven't really encountered anything like that so far in the game. Then, when you return to it with a weakened Mayu, it attacks as if it was waiting for its prey. After defeating the spirit, you pick up some doll heads, which you use on a puzzle in the room that you just found Mayu in. This puzzle is one of my favourites in the game, as it forces you to think quickly to solve it before the time runs out. I appreciate the increase in puzzle variety in this game compared to its prequel. Anyway, your next destination is... oh wait, never mind, Mayu's run off again. You know, for someone with a crippling leg injury, she sure does get around. Mio finds Mayu standing where the bloody kimono girl previously stood amongst the bodies, and at this point it's definitely clear that there's some kind of connection between the two, especially since Mayu is now muttering about returning to the ritual and not wanting to kill anyone. Now that you've caught up to Mayu, the 2 of you can start finding a way out of the mansion. After some good old exploring and puzzle solving, you find yourself in a beautiful altar room with walls lined with paper lanterns. Here's where you fight one of the many ritual priests in the game, and I find these fights to be okay, I guess. They attack very slowly and teleport frequently, which makes the fight a mixed bag. The thing that makes me lean towards not enjoying the fight is that they use projectiles, which I think is unfair because they'll often shoot them while hiding in a wall and there's nothing you can do about it. After some more exploring, you and Mayu gain access to a small library room, wherein you find the key to the exit and are also clued into where to go next, the Osaka house. Upon attempting to leave, the twins get separated by a mysteriously closing door, and now Mio has to once again find a way to rescue Mayu. At this point, you may start to feel resentful towards Mayu for being such a dead weight, but it appears the feeling is somewhat mutual. Mayu grows angry at Mio for once again leaving her behind and berates her with a demonically corrupted voice. I'm not so sure if I even want to rescue her at this point. Regardless, you make your way to the exit and free yourself from the mansion's deathly clutches. So, back to the Osaka house you go. On the way there, you get distracted by the passive spirit of a girl in a white kimono. This must be one of the twins you saw in the vision where the folklores derived at the village, the other twin being the one wearing the bloody kimono. She leads you to the storehouse where the white-haired boy is confined. He then clues you into what you actually do at the Osaka house. I like this method of subtly leading the player along the path of progression, much like how the first game handled it. It's also a great way of implementing exposition naturally into the game. Maybe it's just me, but I find I really need it since I tend to get lost and confused without a guiding light in these games. At the Osaka house, you solve another front puzzle, which is very satisfying to solve on your first attempt, and make your way down a secret staircase to a cave system underneath. Here you encounter a new enemy with similar mechanics to that of Blinded in Fatal Frame 1, and since Blinded was my favourite enemy from that game, I find it a welcome addition. They are slightly less interesting in terms of mechanical design though, as they're very slow and can be easily defeated by just walking backwards, unlike Fatal Frame 1's Blinded, which would bolt towards you if she heard your footsteps. This enemy drops a key that'll free Mayu. After making your way back to Mayu, you discover she's gone. Typical. You find she's left a note saying sorry to someone named Itsuki and that she's sorry about Chitose too. Super helpful, Mayu. Thanks. A vision reveals that the white-haired boy, now revealed to be Itsuki, helped the twin girls Yae and Sae escape the village through the surrounding forest. As they escape, a familiar scene plays out wherein Sae calls out to Yae to slow down as she pulls further away. Sae then slips and falls down a cliff, much like how Mayu did all those years ago. The link between the two sets of twins seems to be bound together by fate. Unlike Mio, however, Yae continues forward, escaping without her sister. It's here you might notice, if you somehow haven't already, that the Yae scene in this game is the same one whose spirit you fought in the first Fatal Frame game. After escaping the village, she was found by Ryozo, the folklorist's young assistant, who took care of her, eventually married her, and settled at the Himuro mansion, where she ultimately committed suicide in the Cherry Atrium. Side note, if you're wondering why her spirit is guiding Mio around the village even though she escaped, it's likely that it's just a part of her spirit that was trapped here, or something. Anyway, Sae's persistent belief that Yae would return for her seems to be the reason why Mayu is growing increasingly aggressive towards Mio, and the parallels between each of the characters make you wonder if their fates will be the same. After a short Mayu sequence, you see that she's made her way through the village, so once again you're on a Mayu hunt. On your way through the village, you're presented with another amazing cutscene. Mio sees Mayu crossing a walkway connecting the upper floors of two houses. She calls out to the unresponsive Mayu and notices a shambling figure following closely behind her, whose head dangles grotesquely from its neck. You make your way into the house from which she came, since I believe the other one has no functioning entrance. Making your way up to the walkway that Mayu was on, you find the opposite door locked, but before turning back you're attacked by the broken neck lady you saw pursuing Mayu. This enemy's design and animations are truly terrifying, and even though the fight is pretty easy, that dangling head will definitely leave you feeling uncomfortable. The rest of the doors in this building are locked for now, so you're forced to leave. While exploring the village, you unlock the door to the Kiryu house. This house is my favourite in the entire game and is home to some of the best fights and scares I've experienced in the franchise so far. The place is littered with dolls, both inanimate and animate. You can't help but question your sanity as you traverse these maze-like rooms, wondering if that doll in the corner did turn its head to look at you or not. 10 out of 10 horror atmosphere. Whoa. If there's one thing Fatal Frame games do well, it's making dolls even creepier than the spirits themselves. After a little exploration, you're attacked by two identical spirit girls that resemble the dolls strewn about the place, one being a fake that won't take any damage when shot with your camera, and the other being the real one that you'll have to attack to defeat both of them. It's really interesting and unique fight, so thankfully it's not the only time you'll be seeing them. After making your way through more of the mansion, you'll find yourself descending a spiral staircase where you'll encounter probably the most gruesome and tragic spirit in the game. On your way down the steps, you hear a blood-curdling scream from above, and as Mio reacts to it, a woman falls down past her, hitting the ground with a bone-crunching thud. This enemy moves around on the floor, unable to stand on her mangled legs, and instead of teleporting like other spirits, she respawns at the top of the staircase and repeats her fatal plummet. It's a great way to implement the concept of spirits reliving the moment of their death into an enemy's battle mechanics. You eventually come across an altar room with two statues in the center that resemble the dolls you fought earlier. This is the start of a great little quest that has you exploring every corner of the mansion to find the missing pieces of one of the doll statues. This quest tells the hauntingly tragic story of a man whose daughter dies as part of the Crimson Sacrifice ritual, leaving her twin behind unable to cope with the loss. The man creates a doll in her sister's likeness as a weird attempt at a coping mechanism, and the surviving twin begins to interact with the doll as if it were her real sister. This carries on to the point where the doll gains the sentience of the dead sister, and this is why only one of the twins can be damaged during battle. The doll statue's missing parts can be found in storerooms throughout the house and are indicated by the presence of one of the girls that can only be seen while looking through the viewfinder. This actually serves as an amazing jump scare that works even without a startling audio cue, and I seriously respect it for that. Also, while you're roaming the house in search of these parts, you'll occasionally get stopped in your tracks by the sudden appearance of said girl. I don't think I can properly convey how joltingly terrifying it is to suddenly notice that there's a spirit girl standing right in front of you as you make your way gleefully down a quiet hallway. It seriously startled me more than anything else in the game, and it happened several times. The final piece you need for the doll is acquired by defeating the doll girl's father, and this is one of my least favourite fights in the game. His fighting style consists of teleporting around behind walls where you can't do damage to him and launching projectiles at you. If you thought this was bad, he also reanimates the dolls scattered around your feet who float around the room and lunge at you, doing damage and breaking your focus. It takes so long to get a chance to do damage to him without getting interrupted by projectiles that the fight soon becomes infuriating. I feel like the fight would have been more fair if he couldn't move behind the paper screens where you can't damage him, and if he could only reanimate one doll at a time. That way the arena is more condensed and there aren't too many enemies to keep track of. After placing the final doll part back in its socket, you solve another fun yet challenging puzzle and are treated to another fight against the two dolls. Defeating them will allow you to descend a hidden ladder into a cave system below the village. Here is where Mio encounters the girl in the bloody kimono, Sae, again, but this time she isn't confined to some vision or memory. She comes straight at Mio, chasing her away and making her drop her one and only weapon in the process, the camera obscura. Mio climbs up another ladder further into the cave and comes up inside the Osaka house. Before you can even start to hatch a plan to get back and retrieve your camera, Sae appears again and chases slowly after you. It's a similar segment to the ones where Kyrie would chase you in the first game, and there's no real danger here, unless you somehow do a 180 and run directly into her deadly arms. This chase segment will occur several times in this house, each time chasing you into a new area. Some of the rooms are laid out in a way that Sae will be able to lunge at you, and if your reactions aren't quick enough, it'll mean an instant death for you. I'm actually glad that there's some level of challenge to this segment, as every other chase has been a cakewalk so far. One thing that makes it extra creepy is that Sae will morph in and out of looking and sounding like a possessed Mayu, almost like they've become one entity. They use this against you by baiting you into leaving the security of a closet and rushing at you once you're out in the open. It's actually a great segment, and I'm glad it was implemented with more challenge and narrative relevance than previous chase segments. After escaping them, you can now go retrieve your camera from the caves below. However, I do wish this part of the game where you're without your camera was longer, since it elevates the game up to a new level of terror for me. I also noticed that during this time where you have nothing to fight enemies with, the only ones you'll encounter are the almost motionless blind ones that block the incorrect paths, leading you to the camera without getting lost. Once you've retrieved the camera, you can now ascend the ladder to the Osaka house and explore it without getting interrupted by Sae. It's a really creative way of getting into the second house, and the fact that you have to instantly run through the foreign environment to escape Sae and find your way back to the camera is pretty great. After a while of exploring and unlocking more of the house, you come across Mayu locked in a barred room. Again, you witness the apparition of a little girl in a crimson kimono who leads you to a small storeroom which locks behind you. All around you resounds the voice of the girl crying out for help. Raising your camera to look through it reveals that the walls are all covered with writing which I assume reads "Help me." It's a very subtle scare which fits perfectly among the rest of the well-crafted horror moments in this game. After escaping this claustrophobic nightmare chamber, you come across the crimson kimono girl again, located by the sound of her bell ringing, hiding in a storage closet, and this time she attacks. This fight is one of the better ones in the game, and she'll spend her time teleporting around you and crying. Eventually she'll let out a big cry that will blind you. Then she'll use this moment of vulnerability to attack you. It's a good fight that requires you to keep track of her so that when she starts to let out a big cry, you can interrupt her with a zero shot. Once you defeat her here, you need to go find her hiding in other parts of the house to acquire a key that'll free Mayu. I really enjoy the segments where you're hunting something down with purpose. It really makes you feel like a force to be reckoned with. Once you've unlocked Mayu's prison, you discover that she's wandered off once again. I freaking swear. Mio discovers that when she finds Mayu, they can escape through a tunnel under an old tree, and just as she's hatching her plan, an ominous figure walks past the window, stopping outside the door. It opens, the figure draws closer, and as it steps into the light, it turns out it was Mayu all along. Yay! Or was it? Mio wonders. The two share a touching moment, reaffirming their loyalty for each other and begin their escape to the old tree. At this point, Mayu remarks that the ritual is beginning, which means you two need to get out of there ASAP. Accessing the tree means you need to dispatch a barrier spirit blocking its door, so the twins head up a long flight of steps to a shrine atop a hill. Once that's done, the twins enter a cave underneath the base of the tree. Mayu becomes faint here and is unable to carry on, so it's once again up to Mio to pick up the slack. You head back to the village and unlock the storehouse that confines Itsuki. Here you learn that he committed suicide long ago due to the guilt of not being able to save his friends and brother from the fate of the ritual. Leaving here, you now must travel to several key locations to find flower crests to solve another fun puzzle. Visiting each location again feels like a real treat, and you get yet another chance to fight some of the best spirits in the game, including the box woman from the first house, the doll girls, and even the broken neck lady. The last of which is fought in the graveyard outside the village and is an amazing fight. Confined to the tight path through the crumbling gravestones, you try to keep track of her as she stumbles towards you. With each second she draws closer, passing unfazed through the graves with her ethereal body. I mean, I make it sound like it was the hypest thing ever, but it was just a decent fight in a super creepy location. Quality stuff. Back to the old tree to solve the puzzle using the crests. Once solved, the twins set off to the hilltop shrine to escape through a secret door. Funnily enough, you can actually escape the village before collecting Mayu, leaving her behind. This of course presents you with a game over, because how dare you have the common sense to drop this dead weight? On the way there, the twins get attacked by a bunch of generic villagers and they kidnap Mayu, presumably taking her to the location of the ritual. Once again, you must go rescue her. I swear. So, it's back to that spooky mansion where your flashlight doesn't work. Great. I actually mean that. I really love this place. While making your way through here, you get another vision of what Mayu's up to. This time she's entering a building at the end of a long walkway that can only be accessed when two people stand on separate pressure plates on each side. Standing on the one opposite Mayu is Sae, and when you reach that door you're helped by Yae, I think. To be honest, it could be either one of them, I'm not really sure. Let me know if I'm wrong. Entering the building, you witness a half real life, half vision of the folklorist being turned into the Kusabi, and are then attacked by the ceremony master and several of his priest goons. The less said about this fight the better, it really sucks. Once you've persevered through it, you descend a linear path through the cave system that functions more like a gauntlet of blind enemies. The only non-tedious way through here is to run straight through everything and hope you have enough healing items left over by the end to face the final boss. At the end of Buzzkill Tunnel is a large cavern, its ground covered with hundreds of lit candles. It's really pretty. The apparitions of previous twin shrine maidens appear, depicting the Crimson Sacrifice ritual, where one twin kills the other through strangulation. Continuing on past this, you begin to descend another set of stairs, but are interrupted by a vision of Sai during her ritual. She is thrown down a deep pit where an unfathomable evil force resides, known as the Hellish Abyss. The Hellish Abyss rejects the sacrifice of Sai, since the ritual was incomplete because of Yae escaping, and an explosion of abyssal evil energy is released upon the village, plunging it into a perpetual state of misery and grief. Sai then becomes a host for this darkness and wreaks havoc from then on. After this vision, the Kusabi rises from the base of the steps Mio was descending, and she has to retreat to the previous cavern to do battle with him. It's a really fun fight with lots of mechanics to keep track of, the best of which is how he'll continue to regenerate health, fueled by the endless supply of souls that surround him. If you don't keep putting pressure on him, you'll never do enough damage to defeat him, but at the same time he's incredibly intimidating, and one touch from him will give you a game over, sending you back up to the top of the cave system where you'll have to make the laborious trek through the gauntlet of blind spirits again. Once he's defeated, you can then safely make your way down to the lower level where you meet Mayu, still very much possessed by Sai. Upon reaching her on normal difficulty, Mayu tells Miu that she knew they couldn't really be together like she'd said at the very start of the game, that they're two separate people who will live their separate lives, living and dying separately, but by carrying out the ritual they could become one. Mio, either convinced by Mayu's words or hoping to get payback for all the hassle she's caused, carries out Mayu's wish, strangling her beside the pit to the hellish abyss. As Mio removes her hands from her lifeless sister's throat, a red mark forms, transforming into a crimson butterfly. Mayu's body is cast to the depths by two blind spirits, and Mio comes to her senses, realizing what she's done. She cries out for her sister, whose soul now takes the form of a crimson butterfly, and hears her sister say in return,
Thank you.
Mio tries to chase her sister's soul, but it joins the rest of the crimson butterflies that were trapped in the village as they rise up into the sky. As the musical score soars to its crescendo, the darkened sky clears to allow the first flood of light to pour into the village for the first time in many years. The game ends, leaving you feeling upset and empty, but in a beautiful, somber way. As the credits end, you see Mio sitting alone on a bench, overlooking the once again bright, vibrant forest. A closer look reveals a red butterfly-shaped mark on her throat, and Mayu's voice rings out.
Didn't we always promise each other? Together, forever.
Like it did at the very start of the game. It really is a phenomenally poignant ending. This video is clearly a lot longer than my Fatal Frame one, which is a testament to how much fuller an experience the game is. This sentiment does not apply to Fatal Frame 5, by the way. It just goes to show how well the series' iconic formula was improved upon. One of the best features the game implemented and what differs it the most from the first Fatal Frame was to have a companion throughout. This gives the player a false sense of security, which is easily broken when things go south, especially towards the end of the game when Mayu starts muttering concerning things and you would rather she didn't follow behind you so closely. Speaking of Mayu, one of the most interesting things to discuss is her limp, which of course makes her unable to keep up with you when you run. If the developers had implemented a mechanic where it'd have detrimental effects if you leave her behind too often, the game would become too slow paced and players would come to resent Mayu. As it is, players are left to struggle with their feelings of leaving her behind or not, even though it has no tangible drawbacks. It's a simple, shallow mechanic with deeper psychological consequences. I like its inclusion in the game, and it does well to reinforce the themes in a natural, unobtrusive way. The first time I played, I would find myself slowing down and waiting for her to catch up so we could walk together. In later playthroughs, however, I would just blaze through the game leaving her in my dust. I still do feel kinda bad about it though. Also, the fact that you spend a lot of the game with Mayu instead of chasing her after Image the whole time, like with Mafuyu in the first game, really helps you build a connection with her. The twins talk to each other throughout the game, checking up on each other and making sure they're okay to keep going. Because of this, you as the player also start to feel for Mayu, which makes the gradual degradation of her character so much more painful to witness. I definitely feel like the reason Fatal Frame 2 is so widely regarded as the best Fatal Frame game is because of its amazing story. All other aspects of the game are either just slightly improved or worse than that of its prequel, but it's the beautiful, dark story that elevates it above the rest of the entries in the series. I've thoroughly enjoyed each of my playthroughs of this game and I'm always eager to jump back into it. Also, with the addition of an extra game mode where you play quick missions with varying objectives, there's definitely enough content to keep you occupied. It's a common trend that sequels are better than the original, and it's no exception in Fatal Frame 2's case. It set the standard for what a sequel should aim to achieve, and with so many horror games in the market today, it's a testament to its quality that it's withstood the test of time and has remained at the top of many top horror game lists. If you've for some reason watched this video and still haven't experienced the game for yourself, I highly recommend you change that. You may have been spoiled on the events of the story, but you'll soon forget about all that when you're terrified, alone, dripping with sweat, and wishing you hadn't taken up my recommendation to play this game. Just kidding, you'll enjoy the hell out of it. Thanks for watching.